Now, government continues to distance itself from the controversial social security and retirement reform proposals. Remember, Social Development Minister Lindiwe Zulu withdrew the green paper following heavy criticism. That proposal saw employers and employees paying up to 12% of their earnings to a state-run National Social Security Fund. Let's bring in the CEO for Business Unity South Africa now, Cas Coovadia, to speak about this. Mr. Coovadia, thank you so much for making time. Are you surprised that the minister has now withdrawn this green paper? She says she has withdrawn it so that clarity can be obtained on some of the issues.
Thanks for having me, and thank you to your viewers. I don't think I'm surprised, actually. I think that more rational minds in government have probably brought that to bear on the minister. There were a number of people in government who were extremely concerned about the green paper, and I must say, in fact, I was surprised that a paper of that sort was, in the first place, allowed to be released for public comment.
Do you think that the opposition to this green paper is because some of the technical aspects of the proposals were probably not well understood, because that seems to be why the minister is actually withdrawing this paper?
Well, that's the reason given. I'm not convinced about that. I mean, there's been a process here. There's been discussions ongoing on social security reform for the last 4 years or so at NEDLAC. NEDLAC eventually reached some sort of an agreement which all social partners were happy with, and that's been totally ignored in releasing this green paper, although government was party to that agreement at NEDLAC. And so we don't understand why the minister is taking the route she's taking. I think that social partners have come a long way to try and find each other on social security reform at NEDLAC over a number of years. And what we would have expected is to actually allow that process to actually reach its natural conclusion. And that any green paper or white paper that's released by the minister should have taken into account the processes at NEDLAC, the years spent in trying to actually get onto the same page on this, and allowed that to inform any green paper that she would put out in the public space. So we would urge government to actually reconsider the process, to look at what discussions happen at NEDLAC, to look at what agreements have been reached at NEDLAC, and use that as a basis for ongoing interactions on this.
Yeah, based on the paper that the minister published, what did you understand that to mean, especially for the future of private retirement funds?
Well, this is exactly the case. That, you know, in trying to address some weaknesses in the social security system, what this green paper says is that it wants to have conduct and move forward in a way that will have serious repercussions for the private sector, instead of actually looking at what the private sector is delivering, identifying where the gaps are, and seeing how the public and private sector can work together to fill those gaps. You know, it's a similar thing in the NHI process, for instance. Instead of recognizing that we have a good private healthcare system, we have problems in the public healthcare system, how do we actually, in the public and private sector, get together and try to find win-win solutions instead of having processes and having documents out in the public space that actually take us further apart and that actually impact negatively on strengths we have in both the social security area and in the health sector as far as the NHI is concerned. So we just have a problem with the whole methodology and the sort of mindset behind the way government wants to actually deal with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, even with the NHI, it's quite surprising that till today, the medical aides that still don't know how exactly they're going to be affected by that system. Yeah. So the minister argues that the motivation for this green paper was what the department regards as, and I quote here, systematic weaknesses in the private retirement systems. They believe that it's that private system that actually excludes millions of workers.
Well, the private system includes those who are able to actually utilize the private system. Everybody is not going to be able to utilize the private system. But let's learn from what the private sector is doing. Let's identify what conditions persist that makes it impossible for them to actually include broader and greater numbers of people in the private security sector. A lot of that has to do with people's earnings, the socioeconomic conditions we have in our country at the moment. And let us then say, okay, if this is a gap, if these are the people that are not in the private security system, social security system, then what are those reasons? And what sort of public sector social security system do you need to cover that gap? And how can the private sector and the experience the private sector has and the systems and infrastructure the private sector has, how can that be leveraged upon to get greater numbers of people into the social security net? And that's the discussion we should be having. And you know, the minister just saying that the private, in her view, that the private social security system is failing, I don't think that's correct. I think that what's happened, we have serious socioeconomic problems in this country. We have a lot of people who are unemployed. We have a lot of people who can't actually afford to even contribute to a social security system. Well, how do we actually address that? By bringing the best resources, infrastructure, and capacity of both the public and private sector together to address a social security system that works for everybody. And those are the sorts of discussions we would want to have with her.
So what's going to happen next? The minister has withdrawn the green paper. She says clarity must be provided. You've indicated that as business, the green paper had not taken into account the views that you had expressed at NEDLAC. Do you go back to NEDLAC to ventilate this issue again? What happens now?
Well, let me clarify, not just the views that business had expressed at NEDLAC. NEDLAC had arrived at a report that all social partners signed off on, actually, including labor, government, and community groups. They're doesn't take into account what business did. It just doesn't seem to take into account the years of work done at NEDLAC and the agreement reached at NEDLAC. So what we would want to suggest is that perhaps open it up again at NEDLAC. We don't think it's going to be too protracted a process going forward. I think that a lot of the work has been done. Let us agree among social partners how to move forward on this. Or if the minister, we're more than happy, even if the minister wants to engage bilaterally. As business, we're more than happy to engage with the minister and have a serious discussion on how we move forward on this, instead of coming out into the public sphere with, in this case, a green paper that all it does is actually dilutes confidence in the country again, because investors and others would look at this and say, but hold on a second, this doesn't make sense. And at a time when we need to actually instill confidence in our economy, in our socio-economy, we need to be very careful about what we put into the public space. So we're happy to negotiate or to talk to her bilaterally. We're happy to actually discuss this again at NEDLAC with our social partners, and we believe we can find each other.